Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the Graphic Novel Apostle.
Hello, and welcome back to the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. I'm your host, Mark Orenberger. So happy to be here with you, as always. And I gotta tell you, this time, maybe more than as always, I'm happy to be back with you. We have been gone for about 2 months, and I gotta say, I didn't give anybody any advance notice that was going to be the case. Frankly, I wasn't planning on taking a 2-month hiatus. It just kind of got away from me for a couple of weeks, and then it was like, well, I don't know, one thing after another. I guess life just gets in the way. Next thing I knew, it had been 2 months. I hated not putting out some episodes, and today we're going to be picking up in our Batman The Long Halloween series, and we need to pick up in February. Now, those of you listening to this in the future, not when it's first being recorded and released, might not appreciate this, but this is coming out in April. Guys, I am so sorry. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll do our February, March, and April episodes of Batman The Long Halloween, and hopefully by then we'll also have another episode of our book club style podcast ready and put together for you guys. And just a couple of quick things I wanted to add before we get into the meat of today's episode. First, I want to say a couple of you have reached out to me individually to just say, hey, where's the next episode? Or you hadn't released one in a while, everything okay? What's going on? And it's been actually several of you. I want to say thank you so much. It is really kind of you to do that just on a human level. I appreciate it so much that some of you would take the time to drop me a note, or some of those that know me in person to grab me and pull me aside and say, hey man, just wanted to check in. Notice you hadn't done a podcast in a while. That is really touching, and so thank you so much. The other thing I want to tell you about, since I've been gone from my last episode, is you guys may remember my buddy Travell McManus. From the first couple of episodes, he was in the background doing some of the producing. He produced the intro that we use for our podcast, and he was also my guest for episode number 5. It was a book club where we discussed the first volume of Radiant Black, and that continues to this day to be our most popular episode that we've done of the podcast. Well, Travell and our mutual friend Carson Miller have started a podcast of their own called The Intake, where they are talking about the types of media that we intake, that they intake on a weekly basis, both from the perspective of movies in the big screen, what we're watching on television in the small screen, and what kind of things they're engaging with online on the mini screen or the tiny screen. I've had a bunch of fun listening to those guys, and they were kind enough to invite me on to be their very first guest on the show, and they let me basically take over and make their show twice as long as it normally is. That shouldn't surprise any of you who are used to listening to me. But we did a whole episode about my favorite character in all of comics, the Silver Surfer. We broke down, just like we would do in one of our book club episodes, a standalone graphic novel called Silver Surfer Homecoming, and then we talked about the Rise of the Silver Surfer Fantastic Four movie. We looked ahead a little bit to the depiction of the Silver Surfer that we expect to see in the upcoming, later this year, Fantastic Four movie. And we talked about a piece of media that I didn't even know existed, which was this animated Silver Surfer cartoon series. I guess animated and cartoon is redundant, but you guys know what I mean. From way back in 1998. It's terrible, but it's available on Disney Plus if you want to check it out. Thank you so much to those guys for inviting them on. I'm going to put a link both to the YouTube version and to, I guess, probably the Apple Podcasts audio-only version of the episode that I did with them in the show notes. I'd encourage you all to go check it out and give them a listen. They're a fun couple of guys to listen to, and I enjoy hearing what they have to say every week. Also, and you can call this a teaser, I guess, but I had an opportunity to unveil my theory on that episode of their podcast that the Silver Surfer is the most emo character in all of comics. And if you want to know the reasoning behind that, we'll go on over and check out the intake. All right, but guys, let's get back to The Long Halloween. This is issue 5 of Batman The Long Halloween, and our 5th installment, of course, in this series. As with every other book in the series so far, writer Jeph Loeb, artist Tim Sale, colors by Gregory Wright, and Richard Starkings and Comicraft on the letters duties here. So why don't we get started with just a very quick recap? And I think the way I want to do this is by going through who our victims have been up to this point. Of course, we've got our crime-fighting team of Captain Jim Gordon, the Batman, and District Attorney Harvey Dent, hot on the trail of the Holiday Killer, sometimes just referred to as Holiday, who first struck in October at Halloween. Our victim there was Johnny Vitti, the nephew of Carmine the Roman Falcone, and the son of Falcone's sister and rival gangster from Chicago, Carla Falcone. We know that Johnny Vitti was like muscle for the Falcone crime family, probably both for his mom and for his uncle. We also know that there had been kind of a falling out between Vitti and the Roman that had been sort of patched over, or maybe not, shortly before this murder took place. But you guys may remember that poor Johnny Vitti was just trying to take a nice quiet bath, and suddenly a door opened and he found himself being shot to death in his own bathtub. Well, the next holiday that comes along is Thanksgiving, and I guess at this point we probably really don't realize that this is a killer who strikes on Halloween. And in fact, the big crime that our crime-fighting team at this point of Captain Jim Gordon and Batman are trying to solve is who caused the explosion that blew up the house of Harvey Dent and presumably killed him just a few weeks earlier on Halloween. And in that episode, we had Mickey the Mink Sullivan and his gang, the Irish, under the employ of Carmine the Roman Falcone. And you may remember these guys went in and individually confessed to participating in different parts of the explosion at District Attorney Harvey Dent's house. After making their confessions to murder, these guys were released on bail, which, by the way, I don't think is how that usually happens. Now, I'm not a guy who has really practiced any criminal law ever in my life. If you are alleged to have committed some crimes, I am probably not the lawyer you want to call. But I'll tell you, I think it's kind of weird that you can confess to murder, specifically a bombing, and a few hours later be released from jail. But sure enough, that's what happens here with the Irish gang. They go back to a hotel suite where they're enjoying a nice Thanksgiving meal together, at which time the door slides open. A hand comes in, and bang, 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 all those members of the Irish gang are shot down. So next we go to Christmas. Our Christmas murder was of Milos, who you guys may remember was the personal bodyguard of Carmine Falcone. He was shot down on the steps outside of Falcone's apartment building on Christmas night, right after he'd had a confrontation with the Joker, and there was some evidence there to suggest that maybe the Joker might have been involved in the murder. Well, hot on the heels of that Christmas murder, we had, in issue 4 of The Long Halloween, our January murder, which really kind of is a cheat. It takes place on New Year's Eve night, maybe into the morning. So for January, it's New Year's Eve, and much of the underworld of Gotham City is having a New Year's Eve party. They're all dressed in their finest, and they are out on a yacht in Gotham Harbor, thinking that they are safe, but also completely distrusting one another. And it's during that New Year's Eve party on the Roman's yacht that we have in attendance Falcone himself, Salvatore Maroni, one of those frenemy crime bosses, Carla Falcone, and these guys are all suspicious of one another. Now, during the middle of this party, actually after some accusations have started to fly among one another, Carmine's youngest son, his beloved Alberto, who had been kept out of the family crime business even though he wanted in, steps out onto the ship's deck and is taking in the night air when, from out of nowhere, bang, he's shot and tossed overboard, and we see blood in the water with the death of Carmine the Roman Falcone's son Alberto on New Year's Eve. So that brings us up to where we are now with episode 5. It is St. Valentine's Day in Gotham City. Love should be in the air. Although there's one other detail I should point out from back in episode 4. There was a figure by the name of Vernon, kind of a squirrely-looking guy, who worked in the district attorney's office, and just before Harvey Dent, who did not die in that explosion, was getting ready to pack up and go home for the evening. In walks Vernon with a folder and some information that he thinks his boss just needs to see. And it's information that apparently ties Carmine Falcone to Bruce Wayne in some way that causes Dent, who does not know that Bruce Wayne and Batman are one and the same, to question whether the city's most celebrated philanthropist might just be involved in organized crime somehow. That little bit with Vernon becomes relevant immediately at the beginning of issue 5, because it opens with Captain Gordon and Harvey Dent showing up at Wayne Manor and being led in by Alfred, where they would like to speak with Bruce Wayne because they've got some questions. Well, it turns out Bruce Wayne is not home and he's not going to be back for quite a while, but in the course of their conversation with Alfred, they are reminded that it is Valentine's Day. Now, it's another holiday. That means they've got another murder that they probably need to be on their toes about that'll happen sometime that day. But it also means that, oh crud, we've got a holiday here, and of course, both of these guys have forgotten to get a Valentine's gift for their wives. More on that in a few minutes. Next, we've got this series of really beautiful pages that are set in this graveyard that is covered with snow. The scene takes place at dusk, and so the sky is a dark shade of aqua blue. Honestly, it feels very fitting for a scene that's going to take place in a graveyard. And here we have Carmine Falcone standing at the tombstone that's been erected for his beloved son, Alberto. And as always, gang, we'll have a couple of samples of the art from these pages on our Instagram account, at Graphic Novel Apostle, so go on over and take a look at some of these art samples so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. But as Falcone is trying to spend a quiet moment here by himself to lay a flower at the base of his son's grave, Batman shows up and interrupts his solitude. They have a confrontation, which results in Falcone pulling a gun and pointing it directly at Batman's chest, just inches away from our superhero. And just as this can't get any more intense, in fact, Falcone has even cocked back the trigger. Out of nowhere, a whip lashes around Falcone's arm, pulls it away from the direction of Batman, and the gun goes flying. And our camera pans out to give us a bigger look on the scene, and we see Catwoman fleeing from the scene. Now, Batman ditches Falcone at this point and immediately starts chasing her down. He catches her and wants to know what's going on, why she has come and intervened at this point. They have just a short conversation, and in a panel that would be very easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention, Batman has Catwoman wrapped up in her arms from chasing her down and catching her. And she extends just one finger toward the exposed part of Batman's face, just above his lip. Of course, it's Catwoman, so she's got claws. And she uses the point of one of her fingertips to just scratch a little scratch on Batman's face. Well, after this confrontation ends, it seems that Bruce Wayne, out of the cape and cowl, has a date for Valentine's Day. And he meets up out on this plaza with none other than Selina Kyle. Remember from when we talked about Catwoman and Batman and Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle back in, I think it was issue 1 of this series, that this is early in Batman's career. This is just after Batman Year 1, you'll recall. And so Batman doesn't know that Selina Kyle is Catwoman, and Catwoman doesn't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And so you have this romantic meeting out on the plaza where Wayne and Kyle are standing together. It almost looks like they're dancing. And at some point, Selina Kyle notices a cut on Bruce Wayne's lip and asks him about it. Of course, he tries to pass it off as a shaving accident. But I have to wonder, maybe Selina Kyle is in the know from this point forward. But they're interrupted by a woman who's wearing a head-to-toe green cloak with a green hood, carrying a basket of roses. And she comes over to the couple in an effort to sell one of her roses. And Selina says, you know what? My treat this Valentine's Day. And she pulls out $1 and hands it to this woman in the green cloak and takes a rose from the basket, which she hands to Bruce Wayne, and the thorn pricks his finger. Draws a little bit of blood. And in a panel with a mostly shrouded face of this woman in all green, we see that she has a very pale face and green lipstick. And it seems that she's rather delighted to see that Bruce has been cut by the thorn. Well, we've got a change of scenes again, and now we're in the restaurant that belongs to Salvatore Moroni, and he's meeting up with Vernon, that squirrely guy from the district attorney's office, and there's some cash changing hands. They're standing in the back of the restaurant in the kitchen. So now we know that Vernon is Moroni's man on the inside of the DA's office, and Vernon is telling Moroni that the DA's got his eyes on you. He thinks you're the weak link in the Falcone operation, and he's going to try and get to the Roman through you. Well, while all of this is going on, with all of these killings that have taken place, mostly involving underworld figures, and as we noted in our review, up to this point, mostly people associated with Carmine Falcone, not so much people loyal to Moroni. But nonetheless, if you're a gangster in Gotham City, and the holiday killer has been on the loose for, going on 4 months now, you're not taking any chances. And so he's got guards who are inside the main part of the restaurant, and he's got 4 guys parked in a car just outside the front door of the restaurant to keep an eye on the place, make sure nobody's going to sneak in who's not supposed to be there. And so these 4 guys who are out there freezing in the cold, talking in their car, a little bit disgruntled, obviously, that they have to be pulling maybe extra guard duty for Moroni on St. Patrick's Day when they should be home with their wives or girlfriends. Well, they won't be complaining about this for much longer, because out of nowhere, bullets start flying through the windows of the car, and one by one, taking out all of the guys who are working guard duty for Moroni that night. Of course, as we've talked about with each of the previous episodes, we go from full color to black and white and kind of grayscale in these couple of pages as well, where we see these shots being fired. And we get this full page where presumably what the killer has done is fired his gun directly into the gas tank of this car, which caused it to explode. Guys, I didn't go into science. That was never my area. I'm not really sure that's how that works. I don't think you can just shoot into the gas tank of a car and the thing explodes, but it sure enough happens here. And, that's a great trope in movies. I was thinking about this when I was looking at this page. My very, very favorite movie is a Coen Brothers movie called Miller's Crossing, which I've referenced before on the show. It's a loose adaptation of The Glass Key by Dashiell Hammett, one of the first truly great noir fiction stories. And in Miller's Crossing, Albert Finney plays the role of the local machine politics boss who's got the mayor and the police chief on his payroll and coming and taking orders from him. He is at home in his house one evening. He's got his slippers on, he's smoking a cigar, and he's got his Victrola, and he's listening to Danny Boy. I mean, what more Irish thing could he be doing on that particular evening? When some gangsters rush into his house who are associated with the Italian crime family, led by the late, great actor John Polito. And these guys come rushing into the house, and they're trying to shoot up Albert Finney there in his bathrobe and his slippers. Finney manages to escape, and some of them are waiting outside in a car that starts to drive off when Finney jumps out the window and pulls out a machine gun and starts firing at them. And as they're driving off down the street, Finney shoots through the back windows of this vehicle and apparently hits the driver, because the vehicle veers off the road and into a tree and then just instantly explodes in the kind of way that only happens in a movie, or apparently in a comic book. So thanks for going with me on that little aside. We're going to do an episode one day where we just talk about Miller's Crossing, because golly, that is a good movie. If you haven't seen it, please do yourself a favor. Anyway, as you guys will recall, anytime that we have these black and white pages where there is a murder that takes place by the holiday killer, we have some items that are left behind in color. In this time, it's Valentine's Day, so what would be more fitting to leave behind, aside from the gun and the bullet casings and the baby bottle nipple that covers up the gun for a silencer, but a red box of chocolates with a pink bow around it. And as our issue starts to wind down, both Jim Gordon and Harvey Dent are going home to their wives, and after having been reminded earlier in the day by Alfred that it was Valentine's Day and they hadn't gotten anything for their wives, apparently they both went out together to find something, because each man comes back to his home and presents his wife with a red, heart-shaped box of chocolates with a pink bow around it, casting suspicion in our minds both on Captain Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent once again as potential killers. Well, as a little tag to wrap up this episode, Bruce Wayne goes back home, and he's in what seems like almost a trance. He's carrying that rose, and he's sniffing deeply of it, and Alfred is trying to welcome him home. Bruce Wayne walks right past Alfred like he doesn't even see or hear the man, and he goes through the back of his house into an outdoor patio area that has a garden with all of these lovely vines that are climbing up the side of Wayne Manor. And there's a woman sitting in the back, blending into those vines as if they were her hair. And of course, it's Poison Ivy, who no man can resist once she has put her charm on them. Well, we'll have to see where this takes us next week when we come back for issue 6 in the Batman The Long Halloween series and our St. Patrick's Day murder. Gang, even though it's April, I hope you were still in the mood for love tonight. Thank you so much for being here with me. I look forward to being back here with you, right here on the graphic novel Apostle. And until then, keep reading those comics.